Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and welcome to our Fat Quarter Club for April of 2025. Now, if you're not familiar with what is a Fat Quarter Club, well, basically, you go on to BERNINAofNaperville.com, you search Fat Quarter Club, and there you'll see a subscription service. Now, our subscription isn't like what you think. You buy this month if you like our project, or the next month when you get sent the invoice, you just don't pay it. There's no penalty. We don't automatically charge you. It's very low commitment. But each month we kind of premiere a video to the middle of the month, middle to end of the month. I'm sorry about that. So it's kind of a mystery at first when we introduce our Fat Quarter Club Fat Quarters. Well, this month it's pretty cool. I thought I would go back to basics and teach you all sorts of ways to make half square triangles, and what is a formula, and how do we figure this out, and what way would we want to make them, because you know if you get 10 sewists in a room, they will give you 100 different ways each on how to do something. So we are going to do the tried and true method, a little bit more modern technique, a speed technique, and then a way that I just can't even believe it works. So every month, I give you a free presentation deck in the description of the video. You can also find it on our Fat Quarter Club product page at BERNINAofNaperville.com. So I'm going to go over to the computer and let's go through this, and then, we'll go to the drawing board and eventually to the sewing machine here.
I hope you're ready to put your math hat on because this month there are a few formulas depending on how you're going to make these little half square triangles. And once again, we are looking at the presentation deck that I put together for you. And if you stumbled upon this video and then you don't know where to find it again, blah, 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 well, I give you the link to this video in the presentation deck so that you all will have it. And every time you see a little link and your little mousy wousy turns into a hand, this will take you over to the video or whatever we happen to be linking to. So why would you use a half square triangle, or HST for short? I'm sure that if you've all ever tried a quilt, you probably have made a half square triangle, but sometimes we rely on a pattern to tell us what size to cut, when sometimes it's better to know what the end size is supposed to be so that you can make the determination as to what different way of making the half square triangle will happen to work for you. But the half square triangles are a core shape that serves to create shapes. You can imitate claws like in the bear's paw block. It can even be something like abstract if you're on an interpretation of raindrops, like some of the patterns that we might have at our store. You can make these any size, but I do recommend that you stick to a traditional measurement if you are math challenged, because our formula is such that we are creating half square triangles from the finished size of the triangle, and then we are adding a fraction that is not always easy for folks. So once you make the half square triangles and you're sewing them into something, I wanted to give you some pictures here of different ways that you can see how the half square triangles have been arranged. This is a very blended quilt where I'm kind of just working more with lighter, darker, and things like that. The quilt below it is where they've used half square triangles to create this other pattern where the dark form these diamond shapes whilst the light is forming another diamond shape. And then these arrows here in this quilt are made up of half square triangles. And this, you'll see this in basket blocks. It's great for scrap quilts and great for many, many applications. And there you can see a little basket quilt in the making and this nice little gradiated block there. And I'm sure as you ask several quilters, like I told you in the intro, they were going to offer you all kinds of favorite techniques, but I've broken down 3 ways to make a half square triangle. And first is to cut large and trim down. This is used for precision piecing and miniature quilts. I don't know about you, but if you've ever tried to make a teeny tiny half square triangle, it wiggles all over the place when you're sewing it. And then when you're cutting it, it's just can be a pain. So if you actually cut your half square triangle larger and then trim it down, it makes your life a lot easier. And then, of course, with our cut large and trim down and some of these other methods, I'm going to show you two ways that you can approach that. Now, we also have speed production. You can imagine that if you are making a quilt where it's essentially all half square triangles and you have hundreds to make, that you will want a much faster, easier way to do that. And one of the ways is to use a paper foundation for assistance. And this is where you basically take two pieces that you want to make into a bunch of half square triangles, you put them right sides together, you put the paper on top, and you stitch on the dotted lines and cut on the solid lines. This is my preferred way, and I've done this on several quilts. There's also a modern method when the grain line doesn't matter and you want the project completed quickly. You are making 4 half square triangles from 1 cut square. Let's have a look at the fabric that we're using this month. So it is a collection that we just plucked here out of our store, and it focuses on 3 tone-on tones. There's some goats, there is plaid, and then there are some dots. We've also pulled some really nice free spirit fabrics, and that is the rainbows and flowers and the happy friends in violet. And then we also have from Wyndham the dahlia dot. We have other supplies. We've got the pattern that is basically like our aspirational piece. So when we make a bunch of our half square triangles, I altered this just a little bit, but this is what I'm going to put all of my half square triangles into this arrangement. This month I'm using the Bernina 77 sewing machine and a standard patchwork foot for dual feed. On this machine, it is an optional accessory with this model, but this foot worked quite well when I was doing my intricate piecing. I'm sewing the work today together with a 50 weight Wonderfill confetti thread in white, and a size universal 80 needle is fine for what we're doing. Now, rotary cutter mat and ruler is essential, but let's have a look at some differences in square rulers so that if you don't have something appropriate, you're going to know what to look for. For making our half square triangles, I wanted to stress the importance of finding the right ruler. Now, you can see here the one on the left is Creative Grid's ruler, and this is a 5-inch square ruler for them. And this is not my favorite ruler for doing this application, and I'll explain why. Certain things you want to look for. You want to make sure that you have a diagonal line that's a 45-degree angle on your ruler, which indeed this one does, but this one only has 1/4 inch increments. There's no 1/8 of an inch markings on here. Now, before you get upset with me, Creative Grids does have rulers with 1/8 inch markings. They have such a vast variety of rulers. I just grabbed this one to show you that, shop for one that has more markings than this. So what I use a lot in my sewing room is this 8.5-inch Tula Pink ruler. And this one has the diagonal line on it from corner to corner, just like this. But this one has 1/8 of an inch markings that you can clearly see. And the reason is, like I mentioned, our formula is we're going to take the finished size of our square. In this case, all of the squares that I'm going to be making today are going to be based on 2-inch finished square. So that's 2 inches plus 7/8. So in this case, 1, 2, and 7/8 is that little tick right before the 3-inch mark. So that's why I want the 1/8 of an inch markings. Now, we talked about doing things a little bit larger and then trimming down and all of that stuff, and that's fine. You can do that. But there's also a thing we're not going to talk about this month, but the quarter square triangle, sometimes if you have an odd little block, there's no getting away having to cut with those 1/8 of an inches. So just be mindful of that and pick yourself up a ruler that has 1/8 of an inch markings that's at least 6.5 inches square. We're also going to need a water erase pen of some kind. If you don't want to do a water erase pen, just a regular mechanical pencil with a thin tip is fine. I'm using triangles on a roll paper. If you're experimenting with this kind of thing and you want to try a bunch of different methods, remember, Today, I'm focusing on a 2-inch finished square. So for that reason, the triangles on a roll paper that I'm using is the 2-inch finished size, but we do sell it in multiple other sizes. Another handy tool that you might like is this quick quarter marker. And what's nice about this is once we cut our squares, we can use this to make a little line from corner to corner. I'll show you how to use it in just a moment. So I told you that we're going to be using just 2-inch half square triangles, and that's 2 inches finished. So before they go into the quilt, they're going to measure 2.5 inches, but then when they're sewn in, then they're 2 inches, hence finished. But we're going to take a background piece. That's what your tone on tone fabrics in your kit this month are for. And then I'm going to take one of our prints. I'm going to go ahead and cut them right sides together because that's how I'm going to sew them. And if you have the time, you might want to pick up one of these revolving rotary cutter mats. I love it because then I'm not moving my fabric all of the time, and I'm just using this to trim the selvage edge off of my work. And now I want to cut this 2 7/8 square. So we're going to use the Tula Pink ruler here. And the first thing I want to do is just get a nice clean cut on the edge. So I can just trim this up like so and trim this up this way. Now we take a moment to talk about math. So here is the math. For a traditional half square triangle, they are made from calculating the following formula. This is when we're taking one square and we're sewing from corner to corner in some way or another, and this is the formula. If you have a desired finish size, you're going to add 7/8 inch to that measurement. So finished size means that it is after the size is going to be once it's sewn into the quilt. So 2-inch finished triangle, I said this before, but is actually cut larger so it fits into the quilt. So if you have a 2-inch regular block, you're going to cut that 2.5 inches because you've got your 1/4 inch on all sides. So with that in mind, in our example, and all the half square triangles we're going to be making for today's lesson, it's 2 inches finished triangle, but you add 7/8 of an inch. So therefore, we're going to be cutting 2 7/8 of an inch. But I'm going to cut 2 7/8 right on that 1/8 of an inch line there. So that's 1, 2.5, and then 1, 2, 3 little ticks after that. So I'm going to cut this perfectly. And this is the traditional old-fashioned way. And now we're going to cut. And then I'm going to cut corner to corner. And stitch. So with this method, we need to make sure that we are sewing with a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's go over to the machine, and I'm using a Bernette 77 this month. So let's go and see where we can locate that on that model. So what I've done with this machine is I have put on a patchwork foot. And for this machine, I'm using the patchwork foot that can be used with the dual feed. And that is foot D, E, or ED, however you want to think about it. And 1/4 inch on this. See how it's wider back here? And this is so that it can feed on the wider feed dogs. Bernina has a similar situation with foot number 97 or foot number 97D. But the 1/4 inch to the needle to here is actually the narrower part of the foot on the outside edge. So where the needle goes in is that single hole area right there, and then this is where we're going to line our fabric up to. It also is symmetric on the other side, so this side, the outer skinnier toe right there, that's 1/4 inch to the left of the needle, but I'm going to be using this side of the foot for most of the options. Now, I want to warn you that there are also feet that you can get, and in the case of this machine, you need an adapter like this, and then you can add a foot with a guide on it. But this foot has a little guide for perfect quarter of an inches. This is good if you're doing strip piecing and things like that. But with the method that we're going to do for some of our stuff, we don't want this guy pushing down on our fabric. Now, this foot is similar to Bernina's number 57 or 57D foot. A lot of times on a Bernina, if I'm doing the exercise that you see me doing on this Bernette, I'm using my 37D or my regular 37, just depending on what model machine I'm using. I stick to this one a lot if I'm using a 475. And of course, I use this and sometimes my 97D if I'm using one of my machines that has the dual feed capability. But I have the standard patchwork foot. And don't forget, when you are using a dual feed foot, even on your burnettes, you want to make sure that you pull down your dual feed mechanism back here. All right, so if this is a quarter of an inch right here on this side of the foot, on that narrow part of the foot, then that means that my quarter of an inch is kind of right in the feed dogs there. So if I raise this foot, it's right there, right between the feed dog and that metal edge, right there. And I'm going to be chain piecing. And you also noticed I grabbed a stiletto. This sometimes is helpful just so I can navigate the fabric through the machine. It's also important to make sure that you keep your fabric even. And I have also engaged needle down to hold my fabric in place as I piece. Okay. Okay, so now there's my stitch, and I'm going to press. Now I press to the dark side, so I'm just going to take this over to the iron and press this over, but you do want to make sure that it presses all of the way over like that to make sure you're getting the most accurate seam as possible. Now I always set my seam when I'm pressing, and I use my iron to kind of just press that over from the top like that. And you know, there are folks that are going to press open and press to the side. And honestly, if you want a flat quilt, you're going to press the seams open. But if you want to kind of have a little guide, if you're stitching in the ditch or whatever, you may press to the side like that. Now, this is my Laura Star with that awesome steam. Some of you might not have an iron like that. So if you want to get a nice flat press, you might consider a little water pen like this, where we squeeze a little bit to get some of the water out. And all we're doing is painting the seams so that we can flatten that down. And we're not putting a lot of water in there, but we're just doing enough to get that satisfying. Now is the moment of truth. So we're going to have a look and see if these are indeed 2.5 inches. And if they're not, we might be able to trim them down if they're a little bit larger. But if they are too small, oops, right? So I'm looking at mine, and mine are pretty good. There's just like a little thread difference there. So that looks pretty good. And now you can see. And see how I'm lining this diagonal up with my seam, and then I'm checking it 2.5, 2.5, and 2.5 there. And now I can just trim that little puppy ear. That's what we call those little triangles there. So now I have a perfect finished 2-inch triangle that has been trimmed at 2.5 inches because we need seam allowances. And I'll do the same thing with this one. And remember, we're lining the ruler up along that diagonal line, and we're just making sure everything is perfect. And I tended to make mine maybe just a wee bit larger. There we go. But that looks good. I'm happy with the way that turned out. So you noticed when I was feeding that fabric through with my stiletto and we were sewing on the bias edge, when you cut this in half, that's the stretchiest part of the fabric and can sometimes be a bit cruel to you. So if you don't want to do that, we can go back to our piece of fabrics here. And this time we're going to cut these 3 inches because this is just a little bit larger than what we cut before. And I'm actually going to take this and flip it over so I can expose the light color background. And I'm going to use my water-soluble marking pen. And this is something that you might find interesting. This is a quick quarter marker. It's a 1/4 inch from where you're going to draw to either side there, but it's also a way that you can quickly draw a line corner to corner on your half squares. Don't be alarmed. Sometimes the tip of this guy is a little too wide to fit in there. You can also use the edge of the ruler. And why I would have you use such a silly little thing like this is when you're marking a bunch of half square triangles, having a larger ruler like this gets cumbersome. So little tools like this are very handy. So now in this application, we are not going to cut this line. We're going to leave it intact. For some of these applications, I'm usually a little too heavy-handed with the blue water soluble, and that's okay. You don't really need to really push too hard. And also, if you really wanted, this could be pencil, this could be a Pigma pen, because at the end of the day, this is in the seam allowance. But I think it's always good to err on the side of something that can be removed just in case it bleeds through on your work or whatever. So I'm going to just lower my foot, and remember, it's this 1/4 inch from the needle to the side of the foot. So I'm lining the side of the foot right up to that blue line. And then I can turn and go around this way and come back down the other side. Now it's safe to cut on the blue line. Once again, we go back to our iron. We're going to press to set the seam. And then I am using my steam to press this over. And notice that when I press to the dark side. Now, we cut these at 3 inches, so we know we're going to have to trim a little bit off of these pieces. So we're measuring, and what I like to do when I know I'm going to have to trim something down, I take that bias line, that 45-degree line on my ruler, and I line it all the way up to the edge where I am pretty much just trimming off my little puppy ear just there. Then I turn around go to this other side, line my 45-degree line up with the middle of that. And now this time I'm aligning the bottom of the half square triangle to the 2.5 inch mark there and the side right here. And now you can see I'm probably taking off just a wee bit less than 1/8 of an inch. And of course I have another one here to trim. Did you see what I did? I didn't use my rotating piece to my advantage there. I picked it up. So now we have 4 half square triangles. And according to the pattern, and I'm altering it just a little bit, I need 40 half square triangles, just this size. So this is 2-inch finished. I need 40. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make about 14 half square triangles from each of the 3 sets so that I will have enough here. So from this set, I'm going to need to make 10 more. Now, the look and feel of these 2 quilts might be very different, but they're pieced together in a very similar fashion. So this quilt here, and you can see the full size of the whole quilt there. This was done with a method where I used a paper foundation. And in this case, I used triangles on a roll. And I actually had 2 different sizes of the triangles on a roll because, as you can see there in the middle, that one of the triangles is larger than the other. So in this case, I paired my fabrics together. So in this case, and I wanted this to be blendy. This wasn't going to be a high contrast quilt. So I paired the fabrics that I wanted to see together, and then I placed them with this paper for the 2-inch finished triangles, half square triangles here. And then the middle piece here was using the 4-inch finished triangles on a roll. So let's have a look at how to make these. Since we need to make so many half square triangles, did you want to talk about a fast method to do this? All right, so what you're looking at here is a piece of my triangles on a roll that's been cut out. Now this is going to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is going to make 12 half square triangles. So all we need to do is cut our fabric 6.5 inches wide by the desired length, which is pretty much the length of this paper. And just for pressing to the dark side and reasons like that, I want to actually have my light piece on top, and I'm going to place this into position like so. Now, we don't have to cut this perfectly because ultimately we are stitching on the dotted line in the direction of the arrows, and we're cutting on all of the solid lines, even these little lines right there. So I'm just going to rough cut this because, I'm going to be cutting it. I don't need to be that accurate right now. So I'm just going to go up here. Ta-da. There we go. Oops. Okay. And then you may want to pin this in place so it doesn't shift on you. I usually start like right here in these intersections here. I don't want to have any pins where I'm actually going to be stitching. And you know me, if you've ever seen any of my videos, you kind of might have an idea that I'm not so good at pinning. I hardly ever pin. So back at the machine, this time it doesn't really matter what kind of foot we have on because we're going to be stitching right on the line. And like I said, you want to stitch in the direction of the arrows. Now, when you use this triangle paper, I have throwaway areas right here. See, because it's not a full square there. So I'm going to be starting right here. And this is one of those situations where you could shorten your stitch length just a little bit so that the paper perforates easier. And with this foot being just a single hole, I can really think about lining the opening of my foot there with that dotted line. And you have to be and you have to be pretty accurate on this dotted line because this is not giving you any more fabric. These are exactly 2 7/8 these squares. Oops, I need to back up the bus a little bit and go down this way. All right, so now that it's complete, we can take it over to the chopping block. So this is pretty fun. And what I normally do is just start cutting on the solid lines, all of them. So I'm going to cut the extra little bits off of this right here. And I'll do the same thing over here. And you want to use your rotary cutter to really line up the ruler so that the rotary cutter is right on the drawn line. And now we're going to cut these guys. And don't stack them. You're going to do them individually. And then you're going to cut down the center lines. Now, this is the one that doesn't have to be as accurate because that's in the seam allowance. But now, once we cut all of these, we're going to have the funnest time ripping all the paper off. I hope you have a dustbuster handy. Now, let me tell you a little something about this. Before you rip the paper, some people prefer to press with the paper still on and then rip the paper afterwards. I don't care. You can do it either way. But that's why I had you put the white closer to the paper so that if you were pressing to the dark side, you're not bending that paper to press. But let's just pop this guy off. Oh, it's TV time for this. And I don't know if any of you watch TV, but Sunday night, they've just started a new season of The Last of Us, and I am on episode 2, season 2. Not happy. Not happy at all. Think I'm going to have to find something more cheerful to watch on Sunday nights. It's been a long time since I've watched a Hallmark movie. I get more into it around the holidays. Chris is not a big fan. So these are straight off the press. You can see they still have their little puppy ears. So we still have to cut those off, but let's make sure that they're indeed 2.5 inches. And quite honestly, you can never fail with this technique because of that paper and sewing on the lines being so accurate. Oh, you want to know how you could do speed half square triangles without this mess and without clipping all these puppy feet? All right, fine, I'll show you. The final way that I want to show you, I wasn't too sure about this method when I first saw it because, the old cranky Yankee in me doesn't want to ever have like bias on the side of a block. I want it all to be on the straight grain. But this quick method is where you actually cut a square and then you sew that square along the perimeter with 1/4 of an inch, and then you cut in half diagonally, and voila, you have your half square triangles. Well, I cringed when I made this, but the quilt went together really well and didn't have any problems. Everything matched up pretty good, and I love it. You can see here it's been washed a lot because, it's one of Bonaparte's favorites. Let's have a look at making this one. So let's try the modern method. And I had to write this down. So if we want a 2-inch finished half square triangle, like our little friends over here, then we are going to have to take 2 inches plus the seam allowance, which would be a half an inch. So that's 2.5 inches divided by 0.64, which equals 3.906. So we're going to round up to 4 inches. So we'll be cutting 4 inches from both of these pieces. And each 4-inch piece is going to yield us 4 half square triangles. So basically, I'm going to cut 4 4-inch squares of each of these fabrics. So now we have 4 background fabrics and 4 prints. So we're going to take them and put them together, right sides together, and we are going to stitch them 1/4 inch exactly all the way around.
This could be one of those situations where we could switch to this foot because we're not stitching away from a line or whatever, but I'm just going to use my dual feed 1/4 inch foot that I have on the machine. And this is going to feel like the strangest thing ever to you that we are stitching a box, but it's magic. And that dip right here on the foot, right there, that's 1/4 inch in front of the needle. So I stop to that point and pivot. And I'll just repeat this on all 4 sides of my other 3 pieces.
Now we're simply going to slice our work corner to corner both ways. So this is important to not separate them at this point. We want to keep them exactly in place to make our 2 cuts. Once again, corner to corner and cut. Remove your ruler, place it on top, then spin so you don't disturb your work here. We don't want those little guys moving around on us when we're trying to use those diagonals. And see how that wiggled out of place? So if that does happen to you, you're going to line your piece up together on your rotary cutter, and you're just going to make sure that they are laying exactly the way that you cut them. And then go back and trim again. All right, so we're going to press them to the peach print fabric. So it's the moment of truth here. Let's measure. And by golly, it comes out to 2.5 inches. How does this work? I'm telling you, it's madness. So all we're going to do is trim off our little puppy ears. Measure another one. Holy moly. Okay, so I have this group and this group, all 2.5. I just need to make one more set of at least 14 squares of this one. So, which method did you like? Did you like drawing the line and stitching that way and the methodical way of doing it? Are you fine just accurately cutting in half and doing it the first way? Or are you a picker and do you like to make a mess with those half square triangles? It really doesn't matter which way you choose. I kind of like the triangles on a roll, so that's what I'm going to use to do these two pieces. And I want to make at least 14, so I think I'm going to actually have to cut. Remember, I've got a waist piece here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to cut and make 16 of these. So I'm just going to keep laying this out as I go and stitch. And you can see I just am making all of my white areas scraps from our other fat quarters. So these are cut at 2.5 inches square. So I've divided my piles of half square triangles, cut 8 from each different tone on tone. And then I laid out this side and then I laid out this side. So I'm going to make two that are exactly like this and two that are exactly like this using my 1/4 inch seam allowance on my sewing machine. And then we'll have a 4 patch and then we'll sew that together. And then we'll have a little block that we can either quilt and put into a pillow like on the boho gem pillow pattern, or you can use it for whatever you want.
All right, what do you think? Now, you can see here that I put mine together in a similar fashion to our inspiration pillow that is from Moda, but you could put yours together in any configuration, and I've even given you some inspiration for different patterns that we have at the store in case you're looking for something to wet your whistle in that regard. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you found something valuable in it, and I hope that you sign up for our Fat Quarter Club and sew along with us. Next month we're going to be making applique circles. All right. Well, if you want to see more videos like this one, maybe not fat quarter related, don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy sewing.